K292FQ Riverside, and K293CF Moreno Valley.
Her son had overdosed on fentanyl. If you can please keep her in your thoughts and prayers, and keep in mind that many young people are losing their lives to fentanyl. I guess where I left off in my story was basically I was married for 23 years, and I had found out that my husband was having an affair, it looked like, with a friend of our daughters and my nephews. And so we were basically having it out and decided to have a lie detector test. And so I scheduled it for a Sunday, and I found out on a Wednesday that he was potentially having an affair with a friend of our daughter's, from an email that I received from someone in her family. And so we went out to LA. It was a gentleman out there that had performed several lie detector tests in the past. I believe he worked for like a law firm or something. But we met him. We paid $300, and it's kind of strange. You have to ask yes or no questions. So we compiled our questions. Like, he had so many, I think maybe like 10 yes or no questions, and I had 10. And when you go in, they attach you to the lie detector. It goes underneath your breast, I think, or like around your chest, and then like a part of it goes on your finger, because it's measuring three things. It's measuring your heart rate, your respiration, and your sweat. So I guess if two of those things come together at increase at the same time, then that means you're lying. If three of them, increase, then, because I guess the lie detector guy explained it. The administrator of the lie detector said it only takes two to come together for it to be positive that you're lying. But three is more like concrete. I mean, three definitely means you're lying, I guess. So we went out there and we had our little questions written down, our yes or no questions, and they hooked us up. And, it's kind of unnerving, because you feel like, oh my gosh, what about if I'm telling the truth and it says I'm lying? Lie detectors, they're inconclusive. Maybe they're not so reliable. So you're scared, you're nervous, and it's measuring sweat and your heart rate. So you're kind of like feeling like your heart rate's already increasing just thinking about it. So it's kind of scary. The way that it works, they do 3-to-1. So they'll do three tests. They'll ask you the questions three different times, and it's like but it's like it actually they only consider it to be one time, one test, but they'll ask you the questions. It's the set of questions three times. So I went first, and they asked me the questions, and he had 10 questions, and I passed. But his last question was kind of interesting. His last question was like, "Are you going to leave me?" And I remember like just saying, if you had an affair with Cassie, that was the girl's name, then yes. But the lie detector guy test was like behind him, going like motioning to me, like, no, don't say that, like, kind of like you're never gonna get your answer if you're over here saying this. You know what I mean? So he's like going, what are you doing? But that's how I truly felt, and I just really didn't care. I was angry at this point. I just really didn't care. So when he took the test, and the thing is you're sitting there and you see a little, like, you're looking at the computer screen. And the reason the guy did it this way is because he didn't want, he wanted us both to be in the room so that it would be transparent. So we could see the screen, we could see if it's going up or down, and you can literally watch it and see it start to go up and rise when a person is lying. Their heart rate will go up and you'll see it. And I could tell when he was lying. At first I didn't know until like the gentleman kept saying, no, that's not true. And he kept trying different things, like hold his breath and different various ways to try to convince, or try to pass the test. So it was kind of interesting. And he was like getting angry at the guy and angry at me and saying, I'm telling the truth. And the guy basically said at one point, well, I want to believe you, but it only takes two things to come together for you to be lying. And every time that we mention Cassie's name, all three things come together, So he got really upset. But there was one person who I asked about, which was the first person I asked about, and he was telling the truth about her. So there was at least one. So I kind of, just the fact that he passed on her kind of made me feel like, hey, the test is working. He's just lying. So anyways.
And didn't the guy have you do a truth one too?
Yeah, well, at the beginning, what they do is they have you like say, is your name Michelle is your
Yeah.
name. Is your birth date this? Have you ever stole
Yeah,
anything
but
from
didn't
work?
you say that he said, okay, why don't you pay for another test?
In the end, yeah, at the very end, after he did 9 tests and he failed 9 tests, and he was kind of yelling and angry, and the guy said, "Hey, why don't you do this? Why don't you? You're gonna have to pay me for another test if you want to do it again because the guy was only supposed to do 1 test, right?" And he asked him after he did my test, he asked him like, "Hey, do you want her to continue to do this or not?" And he was like, "No, she passed. Why would I do it again?" But he kept redoing it, the test for him, because he kept saying, "Well, something's wrong and this isn't right and I'm not lying." And so he kept retesting him. But he said, we'll have you do it again if you want, and you can admit that it's true. And if it then says that you're lying, that's going to give us more data or whatever. So he said, okay. And he went out to get the money. And I went out with him. I was really upset. So I immediately called Cassie while I was standing out on the sidewalk in LA and told her, like, hey, he just failed all these lie detector tests. You said none of this is true. And she still was like, oh, no, I'm telling you the truth. And immediately when I heard about this, I called you. And I was like, no, you didn't. You immediately called my sister because that's whose relationship you're really worried about. You don't even like me. I mean, the attitude I get from her was that she didn't even care for me. But at any rate, we went back in and he took the test and said that he did it. He answered yes to the questions and he passed. Except one question, the guy got a little weird. I'm not gonna, I don't know if I should bring this up, but I'm gonna bring it up. The guy got a little weird. The lie detector guy, he started asking him random questions that I didn't even ask him to ask, and some of them were pretty out there. Like he started getting real specific about sexual details and stuff. So one of the details that he asked, I was like, he wouldn't do that. So I knew how he would answer it. So it was about Cassie, and so he answered no, and that's the only one he passed. He passed on that question. So that made sense to me too. So I'm like, yeah, that's kind of like, making it more concrete to me in my mind that he's definitely lying. But it's a really strange thing to be sitting there in that environment with that, with the lie detector guy and all this kind of stuff. And
Right.
so we left there, and it was a long trip home from LA with me yelling at him. And you know what he asked me too, which was funny? He literally asked me, so because, if you listen to the last episode, you know that I had asked him at one point, I had made up a lie because I'd prayed and I want to know, like, if something is happening, who is it? And the name Cassie came to me, and another name, which was an A name, came to me. And so I called him on the phone and told him that, that Cassie had gotten a hold of me and said she had something to tell me.
Which was a lie.
Which was a total lie. So, but on the way home, he said to me, I just want to know one thing. And I was like, what? He's like, well, how did you? And I go, huh? And he says, how did you? And then he catches himself and he says, well, what made you think, who told you? No, he said, who told you that something was going on with us? When you called me on the phone and you told me that she had something to tell you, who's the one who told you that? And I was like, wow. So, I go, I just made that up. And he's like, no, you didn't. And I go, God told me. And he thought I was crazy, of course, but God did tell me. So, but anyway, yeah, looking back on that after, that day I was really angry. But even then, that was really telling us to, like, he wanted to know, like, how I found out.
Right.
He already was basically admitting it right then and there, even though he continued to deny it. And the gentleman was really nice at the lie detector. He let me ask questions about whoever I wanted. He asked him the few questions, and when he failed, he was like, is there anything else you want to know? So I said, ask about this and ask about that. And he failed on 5 more girls. So he just kept failing. He continued to fail on the one with the A name, who I think maybe was 16 to 18. I don't know. She was young. And you had some weirdness when you ran into her at one point, too.
Yeah, she would. Yeah.
Yeah, so you kind of had a vibe that maybe, yeah.
I didn't at first until I saw her again, and she completely tried to avoid me. And I was like, wow, she was my friend before. What happened?
But you were with your dad, right? And you guys were in a store or something.
I don't think so.
That's what you told me.
Oh, maybe. I don't remember. I just remember her acting shocked to see me and then backing up, and I was like, okay.
Yeah.
It was at a graduation.
Oh, was it?
Uh-huh.
Oh, okay. I thought your dad was with you.
I think you were with me. You were behind in the car.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah. So anyway, so we went home, and at this point, we had a fight, of course, and I slept in another room. And the next morning, I got up bright and early and drove to Cassie's work. And I went into her work with the thought, like, I didn't really know what I was going to do. I knew I wasn't like going to try to fight her or hurt her, but I did just like have this idea in my head, like I wanted her to tell me the truth, but also like, I'm not going to lie. I was being petty. I wanted her to be embarrassed. I wanted people to know what she did. So I went into her work, and then I realized, like, going into her work, what I didn't realize before, it was a sand and gravel plant, and he worked for a ready mix plant. What I didn't realize is, like, a lot of ready mix trucks were coming in and out of there, so they obviously had to see each other all the time. Well, I didn't realize that, that that's what was going on until I went there. But I went there, and I think she was dispatching, but I'm not sure what
Yep,
she was doing.
that's what she did.
Oh, okay. So I went in and I confronted her, and she denied and denied, and was like, "Get her out of my work," and being dramatic. But the guys that were in the office were like, "No, we're not going to do anything," and they just they just looked at me. I think it was like a little bit of early morning drama for them too, but yeah, I was a little silly. I was really angry, and I took it out on him at every opportunity I had, in counseling, during mediation, in the court. I mean, I did a lot of silly things, to be honest, things I shouldn't probably have done that didn't always work in my favor, especially in court. Judges do not like that. It's a no-fault divorce state. They don't care, and they don't like that. Just people, if you're out there listening, just, keep that in mind. And, so he left, and it was I was living at we were living in Woodcrest at the time, and I had Danae. She was 17, and Kaylee was 12, and we had two Rottweilers that did not get along. And I still remember this. This is like one of those things that's in my mind, like printed in my mind, because the Rottweilers were stuck in this cage that he built for them that was too small, and they didn't get along. One was a half German Shepherd, half Rott, and he was a little squirrely, he was a little different. So he would fight with the full-blood Rott. And Danae one time had to go out there and try to separate them, and she was like covered in blood, and it freaked me out because she was screaming, and all I saw was blood. So I thought she got bit, and I ran out there, and the smaller Rott, the one that was half German Shepherd, had bit our big Rott in the head, and he was gushing blood. I have no money to take them to the vet. Danae's yelling at me and crying, blaming it on me because she's so mad and upset about it. We didn't have money for dog food. I couldn't eat. I was just all the time. When you're with somebody for like 23 years, or even when you're married, you think you're going to be with them forever. You think this is how your life's going to be. And it's like a shock. It's really like you lose part of your identity. My identity was like wife and mother. That was my identity. And it was like I would go to the grocery store and like wander around, like wondering what to buy. It's like I would buy stuff for him all the time. And even getting videos, I would be like looking at the red box going, I'm looking at like scary movies, and I'm like, I don't even like vampires. Why am I, why am I looking at this? I had all these like rules about things, like don't sit on his side of the bed because he doesn't like that. I mean, just all these weird things. And I realized, like, gosh, I was really kind of like controlled, which I didn't realize how bad I was, like controlled over him, with, it's like, now I don't have to get, I need to hurry up and get home after work because he's going to get mad.
I remember you hiding your shopping too. Like you would shop, you would buy clothes, and then you'd hide it in the trunk. And you're like, don't tell your dad.
Once in a while, I did that. Rarely, but yes, sometimes I did that. No, it's true. It's true. But I did do it.
No, it's just crazy though that you had to hide that. It's just ridiculous. When he was out there buying $500 RC cars that he was ramping up and going to little racetracks for that, paying all this money out for all that kind of stuff, and you couldn't do anything.
Well, yeah, and that's how it was with him. It really was. And I used to I'm not a materialistic person, so it didn't bother me at first. And it was like my birthday would come, and he'd like not even hardly remember or whatever. One time he bought himself a dirt bike on my birthday. And I was mad. I went downstairs in the garage, and there it was, because my birthday's in November, and Chaparral has their annual event in November. So I went out with my best friend for my birthday, and he went with his friend. But the thing is that he hadn't even paid off the other dirt bike. He was really close to getting it paid off. And instead of paying it off, he
buys a new one.
He bought a new one and sold that one to his brother and didn't pay it off. Even then, he bought himself new dirt bike gear. So his brother could never get the title for that. And I think I got blamed for that. I think that I got blamed for that because his brother had attitude with me after that. So I don't know. The whole thing was just, but anyways, yeah. So yeah, he did stuff like that, but he left and we were evicted. So anyone out there who's been evicted, I feel for you, because then you can't rent anywhere. So
and also, didn't he get a bunch of drywall in your name too, as well as his, and then you owed a bunch of money.
It wasn't drywall, honey.
What was it?
It was ready. It was concrete. Yeah,
Concrete.
It was when we had our business. He had a ready mix business. Yeah, he bought a mixer truck, which I didn't really want him to because he's not really motivated to work. And his friend who asked him to do that, to get the mixer truck, told him he'd give him a lot of work. And then he also told him that he could be home every day by noon. So that was like a double-edged sword because he wanted to be home every day by noon. So when you run your own business, you've got fuel costs, you've got material costs, you've got tags, you've got heavy users tax, you have all kinds of stuff. So we did not break even. No, we ended up owing Robertson's. I still owe Robertson's. They have a lien on my house right now. So yeah, that kind of stinks, but
Right.
it is what it is. I signed for that. I signed up for it and I signed for it. He told me it was his dream to own his own business, and I told him it wasn't a good idea. But
Now you're paying for it.
yeah,
Mhm.
but you have to try to support your significant other, even if you are afraid they'll fail. And so that's what I tried to do. But so we end up evicted, and I end up living at my sister's house, and Alyssa was gone with her boyfriend, and I didn't know what she was doing. I didn't know she was using drugs at the time. I just knew you were gone, and so I stayed at my sister's, and I was working at a law firm, but that didn't work out. That lawyer was not the nicest person at all. And so I left there, and I went on to work at the County Office of Education as a substitute, which was the best thing I could have ever done. I mean, it was like going from like night and day, going to a job where people actually appreciate you, where people are nice, where people care about kids and students, and you have you have benefits and all that kind of stuff. So it was wonderful.
Right.
So I did that, and I was staying at my sister's for about 3 months. I started looking for another place to stay, and it was really hard because I had an eviction on my record, so I couldn't find a place. Finally, out of desperation, I found a place in Moreno Valley in some condos, which were scary, which you already know about, Alyssa.
Yes.
They were scary. So I went and stayed there at the condos, and they were like, they had like rival gangs there. And you don't hear about a lot of this on the news. They hide this stuff. But honestly,
There were so
there
was so many
much
shootings.
stuff that went on. It's unreal. There's so much stuff that went on in those condos. We had bullets flying.
3 people got shot.
Yeah,
one
3
time. There
people
was
got
a-
in
there
front of
was-
our garage.
There was a body in the street on 4th of July, and we thought it was a firework at first because it was 4th of July, and we went out there, and there's just a body in the street right in front of our condo.
Yeah, and that was because he was from a rival gang, and they had told him not to go over there, and he was visiting his sister. And the attitude, of the person who told me was just like, well, he was warned.
Yeah,
Like,
I
if
remember
it,
that now.
it was disturbing to say the least. And it was scary, some of the guys in the neighborhood had it in for, there were people in the neighborhood that were really good, and they called me moms, and we got along quite well. And then there were people in the neighborhood who were kind of thugs, and they just, they were there when they shouldn't have even been there. Like, they were there sleeping in a stolen vehicle in the alley, doing drugs, and, trying to live the, gangster lifestyle, I guess. It was just, and then they were threatening Danae, and
They threatened me.
yeah, and they threatened Alyssa.
They broke
and
into my boyfriend's car and stole his radio, even though we were supposed to be. I mean, I was feeding them. I was giving them food every day. I was giving them cigarettes. I was giving them some money every once in a while. And they repaid me by stealing his radio out of his car and then not admitting it and then threatening me
Yeah.
when I confronted him.
Well, and then one day I came home and they had threatened to hang Danae, the middle
Yeah.
child. She would go out on her skateboard, which I would worry about. Like, I was like, you have to understand, like, I grew up in a house where we weren't allowed to do anything. It was like my brother was allowed to go, and we could only go anywhere, us girls, if we went with our brothers. We weren't allowed to go to downtown Riverside. We weren't allowed to ride the bus. We weren't allowed to do a lot of things. So I was terrified moving into these condos. I'm not going to lie. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be murdered or something bad's going to happen. But for the most part, like, I really liked most of my neighbors except these one guys. So when they threatened to hang Danae, I mean, I was still kind of a hothead back then. I think now I've matured a lot. But I went out there and went after them and started yelling at them and told them I have nephews and this and that and started threatening them. But then what ended up happening, the backlash of that, of course, is like they were hanging out a lot by our mailbox, and there were like a group of mailboxes. So like within a couple days, I had to go get the mail, and and they just all lined up on the sidewalk, and I had to like walk past all of them. And I tell you, I was scared, but I played it off. I wasn't gonna let them like make me afraid in my own neighborhood, where they're just like they're hanging out and doing stuff they shouldn't.
Right.
But like at least one of the boys, like when I walked by, was like hi, and he was nice, but all the rest of them looked like they wanted to like kill me. But I then of course got a PO box. I didn't want to do that again, but I did play it off pretty good. But I have to say that was one of the moments in my life where I
That
was
guy
really
that
afraid.
said that to her and that threatened me, all that stuff, we ended up talking when I was homeless. I ended up seeing him too, or them on the street as well, and they ended up apologizing to me for everything. So that was cool.
Yes, but then didn't they beat up a homeless person and ended up in jail for almost?
That was before that, though.
Oh,
I know.
yeah.
They were
Okay.
homeless too. So
Yeah. Well,
I mean,
but
it happens.
okay, yeah. So I don't know why they beat up a homeless person. I always thought that was really terrible. But you're saying that maybe it was just some sort of fight
They
that
were
they had.
homeless too.
Oh,
So
maybe it was just some sort of fight they had with them. But yeah, so that was an interesting time in my life. I think it's good though that we can get through those times, and we even had somebody climb in the window once when you guys were asleep.
yep, when I was pregnant. Mhm.
Yeah.
I climbed into the window and I woke up. He was climbing onto the bed, and luckily, my boyfriend, my baby's father, was sleeping next to me, and I hit him and I screamed. I was like, "What the," and I screamed, and the guy he noticed because I screamed, so he jumped back out the window and ran. And my boyfriend sits up and he's like, "What? What's going on? What's going on?" And I'm like, "Somebody's climbing in our window." He's like, "You're dreaming. Go back to sleep." I'm like, "No, you're dreaming. Go." And he jumps up and he's like, "Okay." And he looks out the window, and I just see him jump out the window as fast as he can and runs. And I was like, "See here? Like I told you." He didn't catch him, but
He tried.
He
Yeah,
tried.
we called the police, and he thought that he went into like like a house that
this
was
apartment
like, nobody was living there.
condo.
So yeah, somebody had gone. He thought he went.
Yeah,
in
somebody
there.
followed me and my sister and baby around when I was walking her around. If she couldn't sleep, she had colic. It was like she was like 2 months
But
old.
I
walking
told you
around,
not to go out.
Yeah, walking around with a stroller. With the baby, and all of a sudden, some guy started following us around, and he was shining a flashlight in our eyes, one of those bright cop flashlights, and we thought it was a cop at first, and we turned around and we're like, yeah, and then he walked. I don't remember exactly what he said, but he walked up and he was like,
Told
"What
you
do
not to be out."
He said, "You ladies shouldn't be out tonight, out at night so late." And we were like,
Same thing I
"What?"
told
And then
you.
he just started following us around, and we're like, "Leave us alone!" And he wouldn't leave us alone. So we ran up to this car with this couple in it, and we were banging on their window, and we're asking them to please help us because this guy won't leave us alone. And they just sat there and stared at us. They didn't help us at all. Luckily, you came out because you had a bad feeling or something like that, right? Didn't
I
you
don't
come
recall.
out?
I
You
think
came out.
I came out because I was mad because you were not supposed to be outside. I think
No, that was not what it was.
It was like-
no, you came running out, and I was like, I
we
don't
were
remember.
texting. I texted you.
Oh, okay.
You
That's
texted
what it
me or
was.
something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then he was following us around the car, and the people were just sitting there staring at us. It was
It
crazy.
was weird. It was weird. Like I would look out the window sometimes. Well,
And
you
he
would
was
hear
just smiling,
you would hear
shaking
this
his head at us.
escalation, yelling and screaming, like outside my window, because my window was right by the foyer. I guess that's what you call it, like the breezeway, and people would fight out there. So you would like hear this yelling and screaming, and I would worry because I would hear this. It's happened at least twice where I would hear a girl just going off, and she's getting louder and louder, and I'm thinking, oh good God, who's she yelling at like that? And I would look out, and there'd be a group of girls, and the one girl is just like dumb. Like she's yelling at the neighbors one neighbor was a really big girl. She always had my back. But I'm like, oh no. And then next thing you would see is they are just all jumping her. I've seen it happen at least twice where
Oh,
they're just
no.
ripping her hair out and there's just all this huge fight. And I'm like, do I call the police? And then next thing I know, they're in the middle of the street. One time they were like in the middle of the street and all the men in the neighborhood would like, all the boys in the neighborhood
Egg
would,
it on.
would egg it on.
Mm-hmm.
And there really weren't too many men in the neighborhood or fathers. You would just see, it was sad. It was women with their children, and the kids would like be smoking weed or drinking 40s or hanging out, and it was just their mom.
Even the little
there were really no
kids.
dads there.
There was little kids. Remember that group of kids? There was like 5
Yeah.
to 7 little kids. They were like ages 2 to 11, I think. And I used to bring them in the house all the time.
Yeah, they would have dirty
And I would feed
diapers. They would
them
have the
and-
11-year-old
yeah.
watching the babies.
And I would just sit there and
Yeah.
play with them because I
Yeah.
felt bad for them.
Yeah,
That was sad.
Like when you hear about this stuff, like don't think it doesn't really happen because it does happen. It is sad. There are people out there, boys who don't have fathers in their lives, people who are going through a struggle. That's why when I worked with the kids, with the dropouts, that was like my favorite job because I wanted to make a difference, in the young people's lives because there's some bad stuff that happens to these kids.
Yeah.
So yeah, we moved in there, but before I moved in there, I did start dating someone, and I'm going to tell this story. I ran into the girl Cassie, her family, at a restaurant, and I was with my new boyfriend, and I had barely started dating him, and we were meeting his sister there and the brother-in-law, and I was with my neighbor, and we walked over to the table, dropped off our stuff, and then we walked by to go to the bathroom, and this old lady was standing up just giving me the dirtiest look, or she was just staring at me. And my friend Mary, who I was with, she said, that lady's like staring at you. And I looked, and then I recognized her, and I was like, oh, wow. So I walked into the bathroom, and I said, you know what, Mary, there might be a fight coming on. And she's like, what's going on? I said, well, that is the girl who, cheated with my husband's family. And it was her grandma that was staring me down, which is really weird, right? So
Right, because you've never said anything to the family. They never said anything to you, right?
Well, no, that's not true. The mom, and we only knew them a little bit because we played like a family baseball game with them once. The mom actually.
No, we did that like 3 times. That was fun.
Okay. Well, the mom actually wrote to me after I went to Cassie's work and said, well, why are you harassing my daughter and blah, blah, blah. And I said, yeah, this is what's happened. She's had an affair with my husband and blah, blah, blah. And she was like, I want you to leave her alone. Da, da. And I was like, I just went to her work the one time. I'm not like fully harassing her,
Right.
So then this is like maybe a month. No, not even a month. This is months later. Like this is like 6 to 8 months later because I'm dating Jimmy now. So anyways, it was kind of embarrassing because I'm there meeting his sister for the second time. And I come out of the bathroom and the grandma confronts me all like dramatically, like, like we don't like what you're saying about Cassie and blah, blah, blah. And then of course I went off and I was not classy at all. I just told it like it was. And so then the girl who actually wrote to me was sitting at the table too. And I said, are you Becca? And she was like, yeah. And I'm like, see, she wrote to me. I'm telling the grandma, like, your granddaughter wrote to me and told me this is going on. So it was really not my proudest moment. But also I felt like it just was so unfair. Like I'm getting attacked. And it just wasn't.
Didn't her sister and mom say something too to you?
The mom stood up and started yelling at me. The grandpa was yelling at me. The sister would not stand up, and the brother-in-law did not stand up. And I knew the sister and I knew the brother-in-law, and I didn't know the girl, the niece. But what was interesting, I thought about it later. The email had said, thought you should know, everyone else does. So it occurred to me later, like everyone who didn't stand up already knew it was true. But
Right.
everyone who was standing up, they were like telling me that I was a crazy person. I needed to be on medication. Some girl I never even seen before. I think it must have been another one of her cousins, but was telling me I was a crazy person and I needed to be on medication and this and that. I don't know. It was interesting.
Right.
So you go through some stuff in life sometimes that's not fair, but very interesting to say the least. But I ended up taking him to court, and I just want to say to all the people out there who are in the middle of court, I'm sorry. It's horrible. It's the worst. I don't, right or wrong or whatever. Fighting for custody is terrible. Going to mediation is terrible. Every single time you go to court, if you aren't in agreement, you have the butterflies in your stomach. You don't feel good. You don't want to deal with it, especially for people who have anxiety. I don't really have anxiety, but I imagine if you have anxiety, it's even worse. But he got an attorney. He got a good attorney. I did not get an attorney. I couldn't afford an attorney. So his dad helped him a lot, get an attorney and bought him new furniture and all this and that. He was happy. I think he was happy he wasn't with me because I think that, my ex turned his whole family, not his whole family, but his dad definitely against me. But we went to court. And when we first went to court, we went to mediation first. And he was staying in some apartments where the middle child liked to hang out, and because her friends were there, and she could go in the jacuzzi, and he was allowing her to get away with a lot of stuff. So we went to mediation. Of course, Danae convinced the mediator that she wanted to be with her dad. Now, I was scared because Danae, she's a great girl, but she's very stubborn. She's very opinionated. And she and her dad would have it out sometimes. I mean, to the point where, like, he
would
backhanded
throw her
her
up against the wall. He beat the crap out of her with a hanger.
He one time
oh my God.
backhanded her and left a mark on her eye. Yeah, I gave them that. I gave them the picture. There was a picture of it because she sent it to her cousin. So I gave them the picture. They ignored me. They ignored everything I had to say about it. The mediator recommended 50% custody. And by the time that we went to court to talk to the judge, Danny had already kicked her out. He already had a woman move in with him who was an alcoholic. I didn't know. Nobody told me, and Kaylee was going over there. I just know that I had to go over there because they were having a fight, and Danae called me up screaming, crying, and I'm driving in and his truck's driving out. And I'm like, where's he going? You know? And so I go in there and come to find out there was a female living there already, and she had left when I was driving in. She had left, but so it was really kind of sad because by the time that we went back to court, he had already kicked Danae out. He was kind of being a jerk to Kaylee, and the judge didn't care. They just didn't want to hear anything of it. You know, I tried to tell them, and they really did not care. So they gave him 50% custody. But what they do, what I've heard from people, is something called splitting the baby in half. So there's a story in the Bible about a woman who steals another woman's baby, and when they bring the women go in front of either the king or the judge or whatever, they say, you know, this is my baby. Both women are saying it's their baby. He doesn't know whose baby it is. So he says, let's just cut the baby in half and you each can take half. Well, one woman screams and it's like, don't do that. You know, like, no, she can have her. And he said, well, that's the real mother because she actually cares about the baby. She doesn't want the baby to be split in half. So from that, what people have told me is that judges will sometimes do that because they don't know who really cares or, you know, if both parents care or how it's going to go. So they'll give 50-50 immediately. But what ended up happening was he got 50 custody. I think the child support order was for like $50, I think, every 2 weeks. And then he was supposed to pay the car payment, which was in his name. I had a car, it was in his name. And they wrote that as other support. Well, immediately he stopped paying. He never paid me. He paid me like in a check one time and then in a check another time. And then he called me up and yelled at me for not cashing the check because by the time I cashed it, it bounced and it was like a week later. And it was only for like, I think that time he might have paid me the $300 because the car payment was like $250. But anyways, what his attorney did is he wrote it as other support, the car payment. So once he stopped making the payments, I had to go to DCSS and ask them to garnish his wages. And then once they garnished the wages, they said they can't garnish for the car because it was other support. So for 8 months, you know, I was making about $11 an hour and getting $50 every 2 weeks. And so living off of my mother who was retired, she was helping me, you know, buy school clothes and that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, it was really kind of a baffling time because this is a person I was married to for 23 years who claimed he loved his kids and helped raise them for all those years and then just like split and, you know, didn't really want to do anything. But so Kaylee, our 12-year-old, would go over to visit him, and one day he calls me at work and says, did you pick up Kaylee from school? And I said, no, it's your day to have her. What do you mean? And he's like, you need to tell me if you picked her up. And I was like, I didn't pick her up. He said, well, you know, she didn't go to fourth period and this and that. And I said, where is she? She should be in the after school program. And I'm kind of freaking out, right? And I'm like, she should be in the after school program. What do you mean she didn't go to fourth period? Did she go to sixth period? You know, did she go to her other classes? Where is she? And he's like, I don't know. And I go, well, why don't you ask them? And he's like being really like covert about the whole thing, not telling me too many details. And finally he says that he wasn't the one who went to pick her up. He's in a meeting at work and his girlfriend went to pick her up. And I said, well, I'm not okay with that. I don't even know her. You know, she shouldn't be picking up our daughter. Where is she? And I was like, well, I'll leave work and I'll go to the school. And my coworker who's sitting next to me is like shaking her head, no. And I look over at her and she's like whispering, like, if he wants custody, he needs to deal with this. And I was like, you know, I started to take back a little bit of my power and I'm like, she's right. I don't need to be running out, even though it's my child. He wants to do this. He needs to do this. Right. So that was probably the first time I really started taking back some of my power. And I was like, yeah. So I hung up and come to find out when I got my daughter back home, his girlfriend was supposed to take her to school in the morning and she left for work and never took her. So my daughter was at the apartment all day long by herself. And they couldn't find her, but then she didn't have a phone to contact. They took the phone away from her. Yeah, they took a phone away from her because she was telling me stuff that was going on there.
They took her school tablet too, so she couldn't contact you, right?
Right. And then the girl told her, well, she should have went to the single man next door's house and asked to use his phone.
Creepy.
Right. So I was really, to say the least, I was very angry. So the next time he came to pick her up, I told her, she was bawling. She did not want to go with him.
It wasn't
Actually,
just that. There was a
no,
lot of stuff
before
that happened
that, it
between
was
them all.
no, was it that? Yeah, it was like Christmas time, and he bought her an iPhone. She wanted an iPhone really bad, and he bought it for her, and
Oh
then he
yeah, this
took it
is
away,
messed up.
and then he
The
took it
next
away from
day,
her.
no, he didn't even. He told her he got it for her, and then on Christmas Day, he told her she was bad, so she can't have it anymore, and
'Cause she told me.
he's taking it back to the store.
Yeah, because she told me what happened.
Because
So
oh yeah, because she told you what happened between them two.
because
About,
they left her in the apartment all day long and told her to go to the neighbor next door. So he was punishing her. So when she came home from Christmas, her eyes were all red, but she would not tell me anything, and I was like really worried. Alyssa was living with the boyfriend and using, but Alyssa was still in contact with her, so they were texting. But Alyssa didn't tell me for a while what had happened because, well, nothing had happened yet. That hadn't happened yet. But so she came home, and the next time she didn't want to go with him, and so I said she just doesn't have to go with you. And he brought the police to my sister's, and he brought his court order, and they made her go with him. But they told him that he has to allow her to call me. So she's barely there an hour, and she calls me up just screaming, crying. She doesn't want to be there, and I had to call the police to go over there, and they had to calm down the situation. And then he brought her back. He never asked her to come back, so she never went back. But then you end up telling me that she was texting you and telling you he choked her.
yeah, and he was keeping her from talking to you and holding her up in the bathroom or something.
Yeah, because she wanted to call me, and he got mad and choked her and called her the B word. But I didn't know any of this. So now when I found this out, I decided to, since he hadn't seen her and he didn't ask to see her again or have her come over for a long time, but I decided to take him back to court and bring all the text messages. And I was working with, my boss was a ex-football player, and he said, well, get him off his home court. And I'm like, what does that mean? And he said, change your venue. He said, don't go to that courthouse. No, you don't like the judge? Don't go to that judge. Because I was having nothing but trouble with the judge. In fact, not at that point in time, but I was having a lot of trouble. The judge was, I don't know what his still was, but anyway, so we went back to court, and I filled out all the paperwork, and I went to a different mediator. I sent a letter to the main mediator telling them how I had warned the mediator and I had warned the judge that he was violent, he had violent temper, and now because they didn't do anything, that they gave him 50-50 custody, and they didn't listen to me, my daughter has been subjected to being choked. He choked her, and he called her the B word, and I put all the text messages in. I requested the change of venue. I did all the paperwork, but at this point, I had a conversation with his attorney about the 401k, his 401k plan, and he had also been fired at one point from his job.
He was working under the table for a long time, right?
Yeah,
so he
was,
didn't have to pay you anything.
Yeah, and it was not very much that he had to pay either, but he got fired for taking the company vehicle out dirt biking and leaving it on the side of the road, and it got towed away. So he got fired, right? So I had a conversation with his attorney about that because I was trying to get some money for 401k, and he was saying, do you know what happens? Do you know what happens when a person gets terminated from employment? And do you know what happens to that 401k plan, that 401k loan, because he has a loan? And I said to him, do you know what happens when someone takes the company vehicle out dirt biking and gets it towed? And he said, we're done talking. I said, I guess we are, so I knew that I would have a hard time talking to this man because we already had it out. And, I felt like because I was a woman, I wasn't getting listened to by the judge or by the attorney or by the mediator. So at this point, the thought came to me like, maybe I should hire an attorney. Now, I had no money. I had my mother. My mother paid for me to have an attorney. And I hired an attorney who had been recommended to me through a friend who had just changed from criminal law to family law. So he didn't know a lot of people. So he was asking about, the new attorney, and he didn't know him, which was good. It all ended up being good. And he said to me, he's looking at the paperwork and he's looking at how it's written for other support. And he goes, I think they might be doing something illegal here to you. I'm like, you think? Like, yeah, they are. So we go to court. And they don't want to go in and face the judge. It's been now 8 months. And during mediation, the mediator just reamed us both. We fought in mediation. The mediator was like, look at you two. You're ridiculous, which we were. We were screaming and yelling at each other in mediation. And the mediator basically said, you cannot see your daughter, based on these text messages that I'm seeing. You cannot see her alone. You have to be with she has to go to counseling, and you have to. He told him, you have to have a counselor. She has to have a counselor. You need to be working on yourself, and she needs to be working on herself, and then you can meet together. Your counselors have to be there during the meeting, and you cannot be alone. And then we'll work on it for you guys to go, later, to for you to have some kind of unsupervised visitation, but not right away. And he didn't argue, and he didn't say anything, and he granted me full custody. But I went ahead and got the attorney, and we got to court that day. And his attorney was late, and my attorney walked up to his attorney when he got there and called him by the wrong name. I think intentionally. He called him by the wrong name and introduced him, and then he corrected him on his name. And then they went and sat down and started debating. And he comes over and he says, they said that they'll change venue. And I'm on the phone with my mother. And my mom says, go see the judge. Go in and talk to the judge right now. Because I had already gone to court once to try to talk to the judge and by myself, and they made me do a continuance. They said, he couldn't come today. The attorney couldn't make it, so now we need to do a continuance. And I'm like, well, we're over here starving, and it doesn't, but yet you don't want us to see, you don't want to do anything. And the judge was like, well, you can get back pay, you can get arrears. And I was like, well, that's not helping me right now. But so I had seen the judge one other time, so I kind of knew how he was. But at this point, they came over and decided they didn't want to see the judge. So I'm on the phone with my mom, and she's like, there's a reason they don't want to see the judge today. He hasn't seen his kids in 8 months. The judge is not going to be very happy. You should go in and see the judge. So I told my attorney, my mom says I should go in and see the judge. And the attorney said, I really wish you'd stop talking to your mother and you'd start listening to your attorney. And I was like, yeah, that's probably not going to happen. This is what my mom said. So go tell them that we want to see the judge. So he went back and told them I want to see the judge. And then they came back and said, they said that they'll go over to, the other courthouse, and he's like, and that's what you want, right? You want to go to the other courthouse, right? And I was like, yeah. And my mom said, yeah, go tell them, they need to pay the car payment. And he's like, well, can we work on that later? And I go, no, my mom said, go do it now. And he was like getting frustrated. So he goes over and he says, well, we need you to pay the car payment, blah, blah. He comes back and he's like, okay, they said they'll do this. They said they'll give you this much. And my mom said, yeah, ask him for this much. So I asked for more, and my attorney was getting frustrated, but he went over and he asked for more, and he came back. And, he came back, and when we were leaving, it was funny to me because on our way out, because they said yes to everything. And on our way out, he turns to me and he says, I can't believe they capitulated to all of our demands. And I was like, all of my mom's demands, all of my demands. But all that to say is don't give up, because the wheels of justice turn very slowly, but they will get better.
Well, not necessarily, but hopefully.
Hopefully, yeah. Don't give up and keep trying.
It's worth it to try. At least
it's worth it. And sometimes it's sad because men do go underground and they do hide, or women too. They hide their income. They do different things. Unfortunately, and I was fortunate that your dad didn't do that because he liked his job, and he has so much social anxiety that he wanted to be right there at that same job,
Right.
In fact, when he got fired from that job, he went right back to that job, which, for a while I didn't know where he was. And
oh, yeah, he hid that.
Yeah, he hid that.
Didn't tell you.
Yeah, but I got a message from somebody who's very close with him on Facebook telling me exactly where he was working. So that worked out very well. So, but he went right back to his old job, which I would have never guessed that. So I was lucky to get that message. That was a godsend. A lot of times I put negative things on Facebook. I won't do that now. I was very immature, but I did it mostly.
Oh my gosh, some of the things that I said about him came up on Facebook Memories the other day, and it was like so embarrassing. I'm like,
so embarrassing, right? And I did it just to embarrass him because I really wasn't that angry.
I did too. I did it because I was mad I was mad for my sisters more than myself because of how he disconnected from them completely, and then tried to keep me in his life instead of wanting any kind of relationship with them, and it made me mad.
Yeah, and I remember you were rather dramatic about it.
I was also on drugs.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah, and that's why you were dramatic. And I understand what you're saying because you were kind of dramatic about it. But I think at that point in your life, it was a lot to do with the drugs.
And that on top of I was being abused by the guy I was with at the time. On top of that, and it was just everything was just driving me a little insane. Well,
yeah, and I remember you being worried about your sisters and the example that he set for them and what men they might have in their life in the future because he left them the way he was. Yeah, and that's all reasonable. It's reasonable, definitely. But I remember people thinking that I was influencing you and the girls because of my bad
I wasn't
behavior.
even really talking to
My
you
bad
at the time, 'cause
behavior on
I wasn't
Facebook.
really
Right.
even allowed to talk to you at that time.
Is that why I didn't hear from you? You weren't allowed?
Yeah, my ex didn't let. I don't remember if I said his name before or not, but my ex wouldn't let me talk to anybody except Danae and Kaylee every once in a while. But he had a hold on my phone. He looked at everything I went
bizarre.
through. He let me do certain things, and he told me, and when he'll also tell me that you guys hated me, and after telling me these things for so long, you start believing these things. Oh, you guys, they don't love you, they don't care about you. Why don't they get a hold of you? I mean, after years and years
And
and
I
years
couldn't
of
even
that,
get a hold of you most of the time. I couldn't.
right?
And when I would try, I think your phone was either disconnected or something. I couldn't get a hold of you. And then Casey, your cousin, was like the only one who could really get a hold of you.
Right.
Yeah. But I remember.
But that's because too he was friends with him.
Oh yeah, that's right. But then Casey was like, I'm really worried, and he was hinting, but he wouldn't come right out and tell me that you were using. But he was hinting that
Right.
it was really bad, something bad was happening, and I didn't
Right.
know what it was. I mean, there was even one point like where you tried to kill yourself, and your dad and I had a fight in the. See, this is how bad.
And
we
then
were.
my dad tried to break in the window of the mobile home that I was living in and tried to kidnap me, and I had to call the cops on him.
I remember that. It was ridiculous. But I was saying about the time you were in mental health, and we went
Yeah.
to pick you up, and it was like this
Miserable.
competition over like who could get you or who would you go home with, and I was like, are you going to use again? And you're like, probably, and I'm like, you can take her. I was like, if you're going to use, I don't want you at my house. I don't want you over here. I mean, there were so many times where it was like,
I just wanted to go back to the miserable mobile home so I could use.
yeah. And your dad, having the history he had with drugs, I would have thought he could understand that, but he had this mentality of like, oh, she'll get over it. It's just a phase or something like that,
Right.
But of course, he was able to get over it, I guess, pretty much,
No,
So-
he wasn't, because he did other things instead.
True.
Benzos, Vicodins.
I was hearing this week about process addictions too. Like, I was hearing this guy, I really liked him. His name is, I think, David Cho. But he was talking about how he had addictions to gambling and to stealing and to different things, but he doesn't have a chemical dependency, but it's like a process addiction. So I need to look that up. I think that's very interesting. I don't know what.
There's
that's all
lots
about.
of different kinds of addiction.
Yeah, it's very interesting. But anyways, all that to say for my story, in the long run, after going through a lot, I told my mother, I'm going to buy a house again. And there's a down payment assistance program, and one day I'm going to buy a house again. So while I was living in the condos, I was working on my credit. So I bought a car, and I started working on my credit. And so 3 years later, after living in the condos for 3 years, and it was really a detrimental time for me to get out of the condos because Alyssa was using, Chance was using, her boyfriend, baby's dad was using, and it was getting really ugly. There were needles around. I mean, I started seeing needles outside. There were things like
The one time
indicators.
you caught me using in the backyard,
Did I catch you using?
I was tying off. It was the first time you ever saw me actually doing it. And I was like, oh my gosh, you walked out. I was in the back porch. You don't remember that? Oh, that was bad.
Yeah, I might not have caught on even.
No, you did. You screamed at me.
Oh, did I?
Uh-huh.
Well,
I had the
knew
needle
that
in my
had-
arm, and you were like, oh my gosh.
I knew I had to do something. I had to. And
Right.
the condos, it was like, even if I kicked you out, which I think I did, you would still come, and when I was at work and things like that. So I ended up getting you into a rehab, moving the same, like 2 days later. Oh, no, you went to a rehab 2 days after we moved. And then you got kicked out, but it was like really good timing. I think it was all God's timing, the way that it all worked out. I end up getting the down payment assistance. I end up buying a home and moving, and I'm doing pretty well now. I've been with the county now for 7 years, and it's been very good. So there is hope out there, ladies, gentlemen, whoever, you can make it if you try. You have to really be motivated to do it, but you definitely can get on your feet again. And the reason I had to buy, interestingly enough, is because I was evicted, and no one wants to rent to you when you're evicted. So it's kind of funny. That kind of ended up being to my benefit in the long run, even though I had to live in the condos I lived in. I learned a lot living in those condos,
Right.
and I'm not as fearful of people as I used to be, or places as I used to be. I'm aware of a lot more things as well, and the stuff that people go through.
Right.
So there's a reason for that,
Exactly.
for the things that happen in your life. So that's pretty much my story.
Next week, we're going to have Elizabeth Barba, Lizzie, who I met through. It was a outpatient treatment facility. She was my counselor. She's going to be speaking on our show next week and telling her story of how she overcame addiction.
And then the following week, we will have Kim Beckham back, and she's going to be telling us about grief. Unfortunately, she's had a lot of death in her life, and she has overcome a lot of grief, and she's going to be talking to us about that. And so we're looking forward to seeing her as well. And I want to dedicate this show to my mother. Tomorrow will be 1 year anniversary of her death. And so that's it's going to be a hard day, but our family's going to be together. So that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to KCAA. I forgot to call letters.
102.3 FM, 1050 AM,
Save
and
me.
106.5 FM, the station that leaves no listener behind.
Thank you for saving me there, Alyssa. I got a little confused.
For listening to KCAA Radio.
What does the WeatherBug app tell you?
My commute will be a